welcome to the Socratic Forum for Thought. I'm Jersey Flight. The Socratic Forum for Thought is a place for thinkers to connect. The hope of this forum is the creation of an open community centered around intellectual conversation. The lectures that you hear at the forum are not the point of the forum. The lectures are used to provide an atmosphere for the discussion of ideas. At this forum, there are no masters, no gurus, and no infallible teachers, only the force of the question. This forum usually follows the same format. There is a short reading, followed by a short lecture, followed by a time of conversation. We are here to talk among ourselves. Today's forum will consist of a conversation between Damien Marie AtHope and myself on the value of being a real person. By the way, that is his real name. Each participant will give a short introduction, after which time we will engage in a 25-minute conversation, followed by questions from the audience, followed by the whole point of the forum, a time to talk among ourselves. Mr. AtHope will go first, and I will follow up in second. What about Mr. AtHope and myself? Many of you know me. You have seen my debates or heard my lectures in the past. I am one of the founders of the Socratic Forum, and I am simply a man who loves to ponder ideas. I am a nobody simply thinking my way through life. If I say something that strikes a chord, then I encourage you to question that chord. I encourage you to find out the truth for yourself. I met Mr. AtHope at a social event where he was promoting atheism. I approached him in a rather skeptical and cynical fashion, not because I reject atheism, I am an atheist, but because I tend to have a problem with the shallowness of atheists, which I might add pales in comparison to the shallowness of theism. To my surprise, Damien turned out to be the exact opposite of what I thought he would be. He turned out to be a dynamic, sincere person. I suppose this goes back to the idea of not judging a book by its cover, or in this case, by its title. We hit it off quite famously in that we share many important values. Among these are a high regard for truth, a great contempt for unjustified authority. We both raise our intellectual fists to oppression, and a desire to treat people kindly and fairly. We are both advocates for social justice. We are both advocates for the building up of a better world through mutual cooperation as opposed to violent competition. You can often find us on the university campus discoursing with the students. For my own part, I can testify that Damien Marie AtHope is one of the most real human beings I have ever met in the course of my life. I have found his conversation to be intellectually stimulating and intellectually challenging. I look forward to our exchange today.
Hello, fellow people on the journey of being real. As we begin to discuss the value of being a real person, I would like to say, I am not one real person. What I mean is no one is a real person the same throughout their entire life. Think about it this way. Who was I as a person as a baby? Was I not a different person at the time when I was 5 years old? Was I not a different person at the time that I was 10 years old? Was I not a different person at the time that I was 15 years old? Was I not a different person at the time that I was 20 years old? Now that I am over 40 years old, am I not a different person? When I will be 80 years old, will I not then be a different person than I am now at 40 years old? Even if at all times mentioned, I was actually being a real person. I also would like to say that to further on this idea is I have a quote for you and a poem for you. Both are mine. The quote is, "I realized the wisest thing that I have ever done was be kind. Because eyes of hate will always find a victim, but eyes of love will always find a friend." My poem is called Just Be. Wouldn't it be nice to just be? Compared to no one, a prize all by yourself. We would have the freedom then to fly through life, enjoyed for the wonderfully unique person we are. Yet a true appraisal on life simply says it's not that way. But I ask you, is it not just the dumb people in life that won't let that happen? What is it upon me? Maybe I can start a revolution of new thought. And I can do that by seeing the wonderful difference all around me. I can appreciate others and myself for who we are. This seems like a lot, and it is, but it isn't. Don't compare. Enjoy yourself and just be. The poem is relative for me as one who truly strives to stay and to be a real person. Because often I realize people, without thinking it, behave in patterns. And often these patterns are not real. Simply expressed in this way, what we do not understand, we often come to fear. That which we fear, we often learn to hate. That which we hate, if left unchecked, will become a thing that we wish to destroy. Thus, there is an imperative on me, as a real person, to realize and understand that I need to value diversity where possible, accept difference because I need to, and then know that I need to accept and love as much as possible and as simply not hate people for being real. People, we are all on a journey of being real. We can be benefited, though, by the understanding proposed by positive psychology, which is a field of study that focuses on how ordinary people can have more happy and fulfilled lives. This is in contrast to standard psychology, which is trying to fix the sick or help the ill. We need to understand there is more than not being sick. There is an actual sense of well-being. This also brings me up to another thing that involves the journey of being real for me. It's realizing it's an art. It is a behavior. So I realize that it's more than just knowing. But it is important to know. One must know yourself, love yourself, and be yourself. Authentically, we need to be us. You need to be you. Do not put too much care in what other people say or how they perceive you. Stay true to you. I love and must be brought back to the understanding that love bartered for is not a love worth having. And it's also not a love as a real person that I should be giving. Don't hide. Everyone is unique. Everyone has quirks. Everyone has imperfections. We are, in fact, all also at different stages of being real. We need to be honest with ourselves. That also means we need to understand not to be too hard on ourselves. And we need to apply this same thinking and philosophy to how we interact with others. There is a difference we need to see between being critical and being honest, to being real and to being offensive. We need to learn to listen to the way that we talk to ourselves. We need to also spread this to how we talk in a real way to others. In addition, how we use this thinking of knowing ourselves, loving ourselves, and being ourselves, is it to bring a positive awareness of change and how we interact with ourselves and with others. Because we need to remember that also this involves knowing society, loving the humanity in society, and for me, learning to be the humanity in society. Therefore, I believe Being a real person involves understanding real human relationships. When I was young, I valued power. As I developed, I saw power in knowledge, and I longed to develop an intelligence. Now that I've gained some knowledge, I have a new understanding of a value awareness that provides me with a new kind of wisdom. This understanding that my greatest power is kindness. The value of being a real person for me is to understand the ethics involved. For when we love, then we can love, then we are loved. For me also, when love is followed, hate is not tolerated. And this is really important because we cannot accept ourselves for being real if we have this boundary of love and hate. Therefore, I believe what it means to be real people are likely reasoning, though, through the ethical principles for themselves, which is actually a post-conventional morality level addressed in Kohlberg's stages of moral development. We are not in this life alone. Thus, life has value. There is no way that I can only care for me and not be affected by this thoughtlessness. Because a thoughtless action is what happens in the real world. And what happens to the ones forgotten actually affects us all. I feel that we are all fellows, people on the journey of being real. Lives are valuable. And actually, that is what I think meaning has in life. As a champion of being real, I also champion value, both in myself and others. I not only care for others, I wish to inspire. I wish to be inspired, to become champions of value, who are then able to care for people as well as inspire them to go out and do the same in the world. All of us together as champions of value can make a world better, even if it's only the world around us. On such goals, we can create a place where we all can feel value. According to Leon Pollum, PhD, the alternative, understanding formal axiology, is value blindness, which he has shown gives rise to psychopathic evil. So there's an imperative of being real and understanding the ethics. In my life, my focus as a real person, I see thus must be positive. Validation geared towards achieving and assessing a greater sense of well-being, connectedness, balance, motivation, and directed rationale, as well as challenge rationale thinking in myself to produce new thinking, and hope this for others. As a real person, I value a universality of lovingness towards other beings and nature because they're all part of what it is for me to be real. My ethical approach is centered, infused, and supports caring and just understanding of the needs and goals to achieve a new level of balance, self-actualization, self-mastery, and self-freedom. I now have really learned to know myself, to love myself, and to be myself, well, as much as possible. I try to be a truth teller and a seeker of knowledge, a person who is addicted to wisdom, both from myself and others. I wish to stand for something valuable, and that is to be real. To strive to be one who is also thoughtful and caring of others, and trying, if I can, to protect, inspire, and empower others. This is about being real, and real is real relationships. If others don't like me, great. If they do not accept me, though, the real me, then I guess that's their loss. But I will never stop being me, the real person, as much as I can in any given moment. John Abodo, PhD, wrote 3 articles for Psychology Today that validate some of my thinking that I've addressed. Here they are. What it really means to be real. 2 essential aspects of authenticity. Being real without being mean, toward a deeper authenticity. And how to be real without being obnoxious. What it means to truly be genuine. Thank you for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, the exchange before us is titled, On the Value of Being a Real Person. It would seem that such a title means to say that the quality of being real, sincere, authentic is greater than a disposition which is fake, contrived, or pretentious. In this context, we call sincerity a quality and phoniness a vice. But how do we generate the idea that sincerity is a quality? Could it not be the case, pending the context, that phoniness has the greater value? That phoniness is the greater virtue? And yet, this seems strange. How can the word virtue be applied to the word phony? Is this not an oxymoronic articulation? It is necessary to ask the question, what makes virtue virtuous? At least, this is one kind of conversation. This is one direction we can take the discourse. But there is another way to proceed, and that is to assume the value of virtue from the outset of the exchange, to presuppose a specific set of qualities. On this line of reason, when we talk about the value of being a real person, we assume the virtue of sincerity and authenticity. We assume the quality of telling the truth versus the opposite of telling lies. From this line of reason, the problem is largely that of fear. We are afraid to be transparent with each other. We are afraid to tell the truth for fear of being rejected, for fear of being judged and cast out of our social circles. In the context of society, we quickly learn that it is dangerous to tell the truth. He that tells the truth about himself will be judged by his fellow man. She that tells the truth about herself will be labeled and rejected. What do we fear the most in the context of being real? Is it not precisely this terror of rejection? Is it not the classification of a negative identity? In the worst case, a rejected man or woman is assigned their own category. What happens if I tell the truth about myself? What happens if I show weakness in transparency toward the motions of life? I am branded as defective. I am held in contempt as some kind of abnormal, maladjusted human being. There is perhaps another side to sincerity, that of humility. Do we have enough courage to admit when we're wrong? Do we have enough integrity to carefully examine our own position? I submit that one who is being real will on many occasions have no choice but to come to grips with their own fallibility. That is to say, to admit and accept when we are wrong. What do I really know would seem to be a question of humility. He that thinks deeply and honestly on this question will often come to confusion, perplexion, or what in the Greek is known as aporia. And yet, there is a harder question in light of sincerity. This is perhaps a question of paradox. What happens when authenticity, virtue itself, must be compromised for what is considered to be the greater good? For here the concept of goodness collapses in on itself when that which spurns the good is required to accomplish that which is good. Allow me to repeat that. For here the concept of goodness collapses in on itself when that which spurns the good is required to accomplish that which is good. In this case, an individual must compromise his or her values to bring about that which is good. What does it mean to be real is followed by another question. Is it even possible to be real? Is one being real when one exercises tact toward another person? For here we often forego the thing that is true in order to avoid offense, in order to avoid violating the intimate sphere of the other. When the act of being real is equally an act of beauty, then I confess I have a desire to be real. But I do not equate this desire with mere vanity, but with the intelligence of aesthetics. He that chooses beauty chooses a certain quality of life. The question is whether or not we can make the case for being real as though it were a case for the cultivation of beauty. In the end, I suspect that being real is largely a matter of courage. It means having enough courage to resist the pressure of the crowd. It also means a capacity to resist the pressure of the ego. Being real in this sense is an act of freedom. It would seem that a real person is more or less striving to uphold some kind of consistency in relation to one's values. But alas, my friends, what do I know of being real in relation to words? I am some kind of thing, but I suspect the thing I am is not a word. Thank you. Did you have something you wanted to start with, or?
Well, you say that is a thing good because then you find out if you should do it or whatever. But the thing is that is good a single property? We're talking about this today in the car. Is truth, in other words, is truth 51 to 100%, or is it just 100% and falsehood is just 1%? Is it really that black and white? Is it that different, or is there varying degrees of it? And I think the same thing for me, an axiology is, for goodness, the assessment of what is good is on a sliding scale. There's things that are neutral, things that are a little bit good, a little bit bad, a little bit worse, a little bit more, and the most bad, the most good. And I think that it's important to understand this because we actually do this without realizing it. We don't say that everything is all equally good because then how could we ever make a good decision? There has to be some things that are better, some things that are not. And then that is going to be somewhat subjective to the person.
Well, I took something of value. Well, I took many things of value out of your presentation. One of the things was that being real always means something different pending the context. And I think that's actually important because if being real is a matter of having courage in one sense, of overcoming some type of social fear, because that's probably what it is, when we're not being in isolation per se in this sense that we're talking about. We're being in the context of a society.
Exactly.
If we're being in the context of a society, then it would seem that the courage that we have is going to differ and change from context to context.
Right, because I would say sometimes not doing for ourselves and doing for others is more courage than just trying to do for ourselves. So I think, because like I said, to me, to being real is not, in other words, we think of ourselves egotistically as an isolated unit. But I think that that's a flawed thinking. To really get a real picture of what's going on, we are connected. It's like more like a hive. What we do automatically starts affecting everybody else. So to me, to be real is not an egotistic, at least for me, not an egotistical thing that I'm just going to be me and fuck you. It's that I'm going to be me and then be aware that who I am affects everybody else. And so I have to, put that in context, and that is being real, because that's looking at everything. Because I think it would be a delusion to only constantly walk around and, I'm me, blinded, I'm me, would bump into people, oh, well, you shouldn't have been there, I'm me. I mean, I think that's not being real, that's being delusional.
Yeah.
That's not really seeing, because to me, to see real in you is to realize there's real in others. I don't think, at least for me, it's if you truly can see how real you are, you're not special. We are in the animal kingdom. That also, for me, means I care about animals. I'm a living,
But I think you would agree with me on one point here, too. Being real is not simply a matter of returning a favor, though, at the same time, right? Yes.
No.
So even though we see this...
It's not tit for tat.
Yeah, we see this realness in others. Being real is, in a sense, a matter of being true to commitments we have. And it is an act of character, in a certain sense, upholding a certain value that we have to be this way. Because I suspect that a human being could deem to be superficial, could be phony if they wanted to be. And they could be content in that act of being phony. In the process of this, when they die, they might not even have any regrets at that point in time. So I find myself in a difficult position saying that being real is my value. That's not to say that it doesn't have any social context, because it does. But some people might want to spurn that social context, reject that social context. You know what I mean?
But the fact of me denying that the sun comes up doesn't allow the sun not to come up. So, I mean, to me, it's just a delusional person. You're just not aware. That doesn't make the world disappear. The needs of others that are around you and how you interact, you haven't diminished that really moral weight at all. All you've done is been blind to it. So, I mean, someone being delusional can be, in a sense, real or fake, doesn't even matter what they want to call it. But they're not really in the real world. They're not being what I would call real. Real to me is you also understand that, I mean, there's limits to, yourself, but there's not limits to how you're affecting.
Yeah.
So it does matter.
The other thing, when I thought about approaching this topic, I realized that we can approach this topic any way that we want to approach it. It's totally free. And I thought to myself that I actually don't want to approach this topic from a position that is purely epistemological. There's a reason for that, because I think in a general sense that people that struggle with this idea of authenticity and being real, they don't necessarily struggle with it on that level, on that epistemological level. They're struggling with it. We are struggling with it on this social level, this level of, if I'm transparent, then there's going to be a ramification for being transparent. And if that's the problem, then it seems to be the problem that needs to be solved at that point in time is the problem of courage. How is it that I, as a human being lacking courage to be the thing that I want to be, obtain the courage to be the thing that I want to be so my life is not wasted? That seems to be the way that the question is framed to me in an existential way, in a way that's like very meaningful. Because I think the other way, the analytical way of epistemology, can just go off into an infinity of narrowing, and all it is an infinity of narrowing, per se. So I like this approach of presupposing this structure of value and then going from there. What do you think it is that causes us as human beings to retract, ourselves?
Well, to me, morality and even understanding structure of value, because structure of value goes to axiology, and there's a guy who wrote a book. He's a neuroscientist, and he also believes in formal.
No one's going to know what you mean by axiology unless
well,
you just say
axiology is basically the theory of value, or it is a science of value. It's a social science, and as a formal science, it basically puts structure to how you value it. How do you know something is a good chair? We know a good chair because it has good chair qualities. In other words, it has to be able to hold you up. It has to be able to, it can't be one leg and then you sit on it and it falls down. It has to be able to, so it's just a way of using like a mathematical structure or a value structure to assess things. Because you can say a plastic cup is a good cup, but a plastic cup would not be good systemically through time. Eventually that
What was the point you're making, though, you're using it to make another point, do you remember?
well, I was making a point that axiology, what I was trying to say, is a formal science, so it's already understood. Anyways, the neuroscience wrote the book that's called Asking the Central Question or something like that. Anyways, he wrote a book that basically he found out that our brains actually process in value. That's like in levels of value. That's how, I mean, it makes sense evolutionarily. We need to know what's a good person as opposed to one that's going to harm us, a good food versus a bad food. You know, it's a good, safer area, not safer area. So in a sense, we are already doing this anyways. So to me, I agree. It's an emotional and social realm that we do when we are a real person or not a real person. I mean, it's a social and psychological thing happening whether or not we know it or not. So even if we're trying to not even worrying about being real, we're never not in that social realm.
So if we are existing under a social oppression, a social pressure.
Well, social pressure would be better because it's not always an oppression.
Well, we are oppressed, though, at that point in time. We're oppressed, even if we're oppressing ourselves. I think the importance of this topic for me is being able to get to a place where we can get to freedom. Because that's the real issue for me, that if we cannot be a certain thing, then we might say that we do not have freedom then. We are ultimately lacking in the area of being free. And so for me, being real is an act of wanting to be free. The courage attribute of being real for me comes precisely from that desire of wanting freedom. I want it so bad. I want it more than the thing that is oppressing me. So I'm now willing to confront and face my oppressor and say, I'm going to now be the thing that I want to be, even if there's a consequence to pay for that price. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess for me, I see it a little bit different. I think in freedom, and then I have to address how that relates to the world. So I'm not fighting anything. I'm just being me, just being real. The world starts fighting it, or people, and then I have to realize and navigate those areas, differently. So I think that, at least for me, that it's not coming from trying to fight for freedom as opposed to something I already have. I already have the quality. It's the lacking it or where it interacts or intersects with other people, other situations, that is where it becomes the social for me.
I have here, if you will permit me to read this quote by Nietzsche. I think it's an important quote. It talks about this idea on the same lines that I'm trying to address it on. He says that the individual is always treated by his educators as if he were indeed something new, but should become a duplicate. If he makes his first appearance as something unknown, unprecedented, he must be turned into something known and precedented, conformed, knocked down, put in place, molded, shaped, conform to whatever the society wants an individual to conform to. Nietzsche's point throughout his philosophy is that the development in society occurs precisely through individuals that have enough courage, maybe we'll call it consciousness even, who have enough courage or consciousness to be able to withstand this wave of social pressure, to kick against it so that they can pursue the values that they have created and that they find a social value in. Then he argues that society begins to move forward. What I'm getting at is that I think that there is a real value to individuals who press forward with courage, in that they actually help to progress society as well. So it's not just that in the process of progressing ourselves, we merely progress ourselves, but in the process of progressing ourselves, in the best case, we're pulling society with us as well.
Well, yeah, I said that in my thing, that once we are real, we automatically, would realize that to bring that to society. And I think that when we are real, we also inspire others to stand up and do the same. I think that to me, our life is like a political message, is like the person is political. When we do stuff, when it makes a difference, not just for us. And I always tell people, I'm very open about my life. I tell everyone absolutely everything and anything. It means nothing to me. And I don't do it to shock, and I don't do it to brag. I only do it because I want to be totally genuine, and I want to get people to understand that a lot of the things we don't tell are out of shame.
What about reversing it? What about reversing this idea? So what's happening when we're being forced to conform or we're being forced to suppress ourselves is that there is sometimes an ad hominem argument taking place. People are trying to label us. What if we reverse it? What if we reverse it and we declare that human beings that do this to us, human beings that try to say that we can't be a certain way, we say that they're petty. We use an ad hominem argument against them. We start redirecting the emphasis. Because I think this is a good way to tackle this problem, is to state what their behavior is in relation to individuals who are being real and use a negative connotation to describe it. What do you think about that?
Well, and my personal thing is to attack thinking and not people. That is just a general way that I believe everything. Because I think that, once again, to me, people have value. And so I do attack ideas, I do challenge behaviors, but when I attack and challenge behaviors, I still do it with respect.
Yeah.
I believe in people, and I believe that we can appeal to their decency. And the ones that you can't, I feel sorry for. It's a sad state of someone's moral compass if they don't understand to care about the ones around them. And so I can only feel bad for them. And so it's hard. It would be hard. So you're asking, could I want to call them names? It would be hard because either you can reason with the person and they can, because they're got character, or they don't have character, and then I can only feel really sad for that person if they don't have character.
It seems to me like a human being like that would be a walking contradiction. The why I say that is because unless they're naked and alone in the wilderness and have gotten everything themselves,
Right.
they're contingent on a social structure that allows them to practice some type of individuality. So if they then turn and use that individuality against the society that they're contingent upon, that would seem to be a little bit problematic for me. It would be a confusion, like a contradiction.
But if you're asking me if I was in control of a society, I totally allow that, because that sometimes is being real. It doesn't mean everything that's real is going to be pleasant. I don't have a right to not be offended. I think that, like I said, understanding the realness of me means I have to understand the realness of others. And some other people I'm not going to like. And you know what? That's okay. I'm not for this thing where we have to control everything. Some people we should look at and go, I need to avoid. I mean, it doesn't mean I want to make them part of my, inner circle. But
yeah, that brings up an important point for passive aggressiveness. It's something that I think maybe we all have to one degree or another. I have a hard time dealing with it when I have passive aggressive people in my life. I usually cut them out because they're not direct, they're not straightforward. So I try to be as straightforward with everybody as I possibly can be. But passive aggressiveness, I think, stems from, once again, a social fear. And this is the point I'm trying to connect it with yours, is that we are afraid to offend people because we want people to talk good about our character in some way. We don't want them to think that we're a certain type of a human being. So passive-aggressive people don't want to bite the bullet, in my opinion, because they are a certain type of person. And if they manifested their attitude and their disposition a lot of the time, people would go, hey, man, that's not cool, or I don't want to be around that. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. But in the cases where this would happen, I think it's a matter of taking heed to one's character at that point in time. In the cases where it's just a timidness, I think it's a matter of realizing that, sometimes, as you're saying, we have to offend people in the process of being real.
Right, we have to offend people, but I think I'm trying to help you understand for how I'm saying it. To me, like I knew this one woman, right? She had a problem with her kid. Her kid was outrageous. She would scream at him, stop, shut up, quiet, calm down, screaming. And I told her, have you ever thought that maybe your aggression is not getting a good model for him to calm down? I said, give me a half an hour with him. And I went out in the backyard, and I just sat there. He screamed and jumped on me, and I just sat there. I talked calm, I talked peaceful. So what I'm trying to say to you is this. When there's people that have these behaviors that are not pro-social, I think one of the best things is not to belittle them or be part of the problem. For me.
No, I agree.
I'm saying, for me, let me finish. So for me, what it is actually to be a model for what they should be. How can I ask you to be something that I'm not willing to do myself? One of the best things, I think, like it's actions speak louder than words. So my behavior of constantly, and I agree, even when people call me names, people tell me to screw off on Facebook or in life, and I don't attack them. Because I'm not nice to the people because they're nice to me. I'm nice to people because I deserve it. It's about my character. My character, if you're saying, so character changes with people or something, to me it doesn't. Your character should be rock solid, who you are.
See,
and that
to me,
should be exhibited in everything you do, including being attacked. In fact, if you're able to be a friend to someone who's nice to you, does that really matter? Can you be a friend to someone who's not? That is character.
I think Jesus said this, if you love
well, I won't go with Jesus.
If you love them which only love you, what thank have you? I agree with you on this idea. I don't believe in belittling people. This issue of character that it comes back to, this is why, to me, in the course of dialectic, when you have an exchange, you have a clash, that the bottom line of a conversation or a discourse is when we get back to the definition of character. When you define the character through that exchange, that is the climax of dialectic to me. Because when you get to that point, you're getting back to whether or not you want to accept a person or reject a person. Because you're getting back to that central character that a person has. I try to be as consistent as I can. And one of the things I would try to say in consistency is, I hold the same type of values that you hold in my conduct with human beings. But even in holding that, I still affirm the right of human beings to reject those values. However, not without consequence. There is going to be a consequence, but if they want to accept the consequence and reject those values, that's completely within their prerogative to do so.
Well, like I said, I try to frame things in a different way. I try to see not how much I can take out of life, but how much I can give back. I try to see of my own character, not how much I can take away and still have character, but how much I can add and still see myself as a character. I remember when I was younger, I looked in the mirror and I said, I want to stop hating the person looking back. And then I realized I wanted to be my friend. And then later I realized, you know what? I would rather be someone proud to know. I want to be someone of myself. If I was, meet me, I would say, I am proud to know that person. I want to be the person that I would be proud of. And so that's how I do my social interaction. I think that society needs to care about the individual. And I think the individual needs to care about society. We are connected.
I'm just thinking that labels do have a place, though. And it's kind of difficult when you bring that into it, because the label bad, we would even use the label monster to describe some people. I mean, there's lots of terms, derogatory terms that we can use, but these do serve a purpose. They serve the purpose that you're manifesting even now by talking. They serve the purpose to downgrade behavior that we reject and thereby promote behavior that we accept. That's why I said, what about this idea of shifting this act of derogatoriness away from the authentic person who's trying to be sincere and move it toward the people who are trying to shame? In other words, to shame the shamers, to use their own shame against them so that we can break free. And I think you're even doing that in the process of saying, I want to have a good character, because you're assuming that the opposite of the character you're saying would be a bad character. There'd be some type of defect with it, right?
Or to me, it's an unworthy.
Yeah.
Towards what my goals are.
That gets back to the point that in dialectic, we have made real progress when we come to the conclusion that we are making a pronouncement about character. We're not talking about an ad hominem here. An ad hominem argument is an argument that you attack someone's character as a direct refutation of their position.
But I'm addressing to how this relates. I have a degree in psychology, a bachelor's, and I had a couple classes of master's. But anyways, behaviorism is already proved if your argument is the valid one. Because behaviorism is already tested negative persuasion and positive persuasion. And let me tell you, positive persuasion wins the day. I mean, hands down. Because if the only things you don't do is because you're punished, then you only are good as long as you can be not caught. But if you're good because of the worth of good, then you're good even if you can't get caught.
Well, what I'm saying is that, but there has to be a place for negative terms. Because we couldn't say
Does there?
Yes.
How does that self-justify?
Yes.
How is it self-justified?
Because in order to say a good, we would have to assume the opposite. In order to make a positive,
But you're not just saying there is an opposite. I'm not disagreeing there's an opposite. You're saying it's beneficial as a positive to use the negative. And I'm saying I reject that. I don't think that we need to. In other words, it's like saying, we're going to drop bombs for freedom.
well,
I mean,
but at some point, I'm assuming that you would agree that you're going to say that something is bad. You're going to.
I never said that. I never didn't say there was.
Well, that's the point. The point is that at some point we're going to use a negative terminology, and the reason is, why would we be utilizing that if it did not have any type of a value to it? So I'm saying there is a value to negative terminology.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying it's not positive to apply it towards people with the goal of producing that person to have positive. You don't do negative to get positive. It works. It's in behaviorism. They prove it works. It's just not very effective. It's not very lasting, and it's not very global in its effect. In other words, if I say don't do this because you're going to get spanked, you only do that one thing. If you teach a good behavior, then they learn through things you haven't told them.
Well, I think you're maybe misunderstanding what I'm saying, because I'm not saying that that's what we do. When I asked the position as a question. And I said, what do you think about that? So I'm trying to probe these ideas. I'm trying to see if there's any substance to them.
That's what I'm saying, though, is you're saying labels towards persons. It's not an arbitrary thing of this label. You're saying label to persons. And I even have a problem in psychology where they label that this person has bipolar. Because they usually say that person is bipolar. When I would say that person is experiencing symptoms that seem to be bipolar, or matches what we think bipolar is. So I think that there's a real danger in labeling people, even if it's a justified, and certainly if someone has suffering, mental issue problems, I think that it's beneficial to understand what you're doing. But I think it's negative to own the thing that you are. I am bipolar. I mean, that instead of I'm experiencing, I'm not cancer. I'm not a broken leg I think this is wrong to own labels, because it's limiting. If our goal is that we don't like a behavior in a person, I think that making that person feel that they are that would actually produce more of that effect.
So you're saying own the label in the case of what is positive, reject the label in the case of what is negative. Is that what you'd be saying?
Well, but because what's the goal? The value. What's the value is because if you're saying something, a person is bad, you're not valuing the character that's being exhibited by them.
We don't have time, but I just think that there can be value in the use of a negative label. I think it can be useful to us in distancing ourselves.
And I'm just saying that instead of trying to punish people, we should be putting them to college.
Well, I'm not referring to punishment, but
no. I'm saying because if you're saying it seems punishment, and maybe I'm misinterpreting. If you're saying someone does something we don't like, we give them a label that's negative. That's not a punishment.
I also have to confess that the argument's not original on my part. That it was made by Arthur Schopenhauer long ago when he argued that when we criticize something negatively, we are in effect building our character because we're distancing ourselves from that thing. We're out of time.
Okay.
By the way. I
Well,
got the
good
last
talk.
word. It was an excellent talk. Yeah. So questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I don't have a philosophy degree, but I definitely have a point of view here. Even though all of us speak English, have a common culture, I think the notion of language is just fraught with misperception. And it almost really makes everything that was said here nonsensical. I wish I'd kept notes, but one of the things that occurred to me, Damien, is you said that, when you were 5, you thought one way at 10, and that somehow you were less real at 5, and you're more real at 10, and then you change again.
No, I know what I was saying is, what I would have explained or could have been explained about me as a real person at 5 is gonna change. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying being real is not some fixed place. Like I was born real, stayed real, 100%, never changed a thing. I mean that's lunacy to me to say that.
So what makes us real?
Like I said, it's how we interact. To me, in the real world, it's a behavior. It's not a dress. It's not a style. It's a behavior. It's a thinking. It's understanding and seeing, to me, the bigger picture involved of all the value. It's like I said in my thing. It's a value awareness. It's the opposite of value blindness.
See, when I hear this, I hear hermeneutics. It's hermeneutics. That's what I hear.
Well, what I believe is what makes us real is not the words. It's love. And I basically see what goes on with human beings is that there's this direct, we'll love until it becomes inconvenient or painful or it affects our ego. And then we can come up with incredible words, depending upon our education, to justify this. But, but the bottom line is, and authenticity, to me, you can be authentically a bad person, but I think what we all understand or share is the notion of what love is. And if you could apply that principle about loving, and even then that could be really, we think of erotic love, attachment.
Well, if I can say something, for me, the question is a difficult question of what does it mean to be real in one sense, because it's always contingent on the context in which it is asked. And because of that, my answer is going to differ from another person's answer, probably. So there's a subjectivism that I would hold to in the context of being real. It's hard, though, because I've been probing truth for quite some time now. I have not come to a settled position on it. And there are things that remain, but I essentially lean in the direction of subjectivity when it comes to ideas like this. So I think it's going to be contingent on the context of the person who's asking the question ultimately. There'll be a whole set of fears, obstacles that they probably have to face in order to get to that status, and it will differ for someone else possibly. So.
If that is true, and I agree with you, then you have to say, well, what is truth? Because is truth something that's truth in one situation but not another?
Unlike Pilate, I haven't quite walked away yet, That's the reference to the Gospels. Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? And he walks away. But I haven't quite walked away yet. I'm still looking at the issue of that. That's one way that it can be probed. That's like an epistemological way to probe the topic, which some people would argue is prior.
You guys, the title of the meeting seemed to be referencing, seemed to be like, I was sort of expecting we were going to hear about what it means to be a person. And I kind of don't think I heard that at all, virtually not at all. It seemed like both you dudes just assumed that persons are persons. And I heard a whole bunch of talk about real persons versus, I guess, unreal persons, which means, I guess, we're assuming there are at least two kinds of persons, real persons and unreal persons. But I'm a little flabbergasted that there wasn't much energy put in to help me understand what a person is.
Well, to me, it was about the value of being a real person. So, let me answer.
Refer to anything about value.
It's on the value of being a real person. Is that the title accurate?
Oh, it did.
Okay, so to me, that question is presupposing personhood, and also presupposing the quality of being real. It's not asking, is there a real person? Is there such thing as real? Is there such thing as a person? It is saying we are going to discuss the value of being a real person. So to me, I mean, if you feel it wasn't, sorry that you feel that way, because to me, I feel that we addressed, or at least I tried to address myself, what it was to have the value of being a real person.
I like your distinction. I like the distinction, two type of persons. I think you're right. I think that's presupposed in the context. For my part, I was approaching this subject more from an existential setting. And with that, it wasn't so much epistemological. I would see that more as like an epistemological, ontological status, which is more in line with a philosophical, more intense philosophical perspective. And I know you're an intense philosophical guy. So, but I appreciate that. Without even probing it in depth, I can see that I think there would be some value in that. Sorry, we didn't go into it. Maybe another time we can probe the philosophical,
Well, because if
the duality of persons.
Right, because if we're going to do that, then we'd also have to probe the value of what's value. Because to put that against something else, you would first have to know what you're talking about. Because how could you, even if you knew what a real person was, if you don't understand what value is, how could you assess that? So, I mean, of course, it could be a lot longer, presentation, and we could address all the issues. But
I saw people falling asleep just when I was talking, so I thought, if I keep on doing this, like the whole audience will be asleep. I'll have one person awake, that'd be you.
Well, I don't really have a question, but I was listening to the discussion, which I enjoyed very much. I sort of ran a thought experiment through my mind with the different points you were making. And one, it seemed to me that, speaking of subjectivity, if one is oppressed under a tyrant, one would have a different reaction to other people, and your authentic self would be really contingent on the situation and whether you were in a benevolent environment or in an oppressed environment. And that's so things would sort of go in and out of making sense depending on the thought experiment if you were oppressed or in a benevolent environment. So that seemed to be one of the...
But, I mean, and I definitely agree. Like I said, I don't think that realness is a quality that you're there, done, ended. So to me, I think that's a totally valid point. I mean, it's going to change under any circumstance, even in your life, how you're real with a spouse or a loved one, how you're real with a stranger, how you're real with a boss. I mean, these are all different environments that are going to have a different effect on your application or level of realness.
Do you think the Dalai Lama is more authentic than is the Dalai Lama authentic, and is it dependent upon the environment he's in?
Well, I'm an anti-religious person, so you may or may not want to hear my answer. Do you want to? I find him to be extremely fake. I find him to be one of the most fakest people I've ever met, but I mean, because he makes statements that contradict him to the core. But anyways, I'll let it go at that.
Let me. I think you said it that a person can be authentically bad. The point that I would draw from that is that that's like a real conversation there. Then at that point in time, the point you bring up, because the point then is not authenticity itself. With that point, you actually draw the discourse beyond the point of authenticity to the actual substance of what it is. It's not just enough to be authentic then. We learn from that. But we learn that we have to be authentic how? Do we be authentic as Hitler was authentic? Are we authentic as Dr. King was authentic? So, yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I wish it would have crossed my mind when we were talking and we could have probed something like that, because that gets, I think, very much to the issue, the central issue of what it means to be, not just authentic, but what it means to be. And it seems to me that all of this goes back to a conversation on ethics. What's good, what's bad. And so that's why I said in my introduction that you could do this different ways. You can presuppose it, that this characteristic is a good characteristic and this characteristic is a bad characteristic. I like to talk about it that way because I like to make progress. And I feel like if I don't talk about it that way, and I just talk about the epistemology involved, I'm not going to get to talk about the things I want to talk about. I'm going to end up talking about, what it means to be one person versus another person, what does truth mean, and then I'm going to be sidetracked. For me, my life is aesthetic. I take beauty over truth in my life. So I wanted to have a conversation that was aesthetically pleasing to me. And because of that, I wanted to go down this other road where I could get somewhere, at least feel like I'm getting somewhere.
I think if one is going to be authentic, they have to get rid of shame in their life, shaming themselves and shaming other people. And I think a lot of people do that in our society. And shame is saying someone's good or bad, because we just are. I mean, people can have good or bad behaviors, but I think we need to get rid of the sense of shame if we want to be authentic.
Yeah, I think that the way that the discourse, I love the development of ideas. See, to me, a discourse develops. I try not to be dogmatic in it. I try to listen to what people say from all walks of life because I want the ideas to move forward. So with this idea of authenticity being evil, authenticity being good, the comment you made is translated into, to be a moral person, we have to ultimately get rid of this idea of shame. Or to be a courageous person, we have to get rid of this idea of shame. And I think that shame is a bad thing. Nietzsche said that shame is voluntary because we force it on ourselves. It's something that's projected from without, per se, from society, but then we superimpose it on ourselves, thereby affirming it. So the key to getting rid of it is saying, I'm not going to affirm that in my life anymore. I'm feeling these strong feelings. I think I'm going to invalidate them and now move forward, against these things. Is there any more comments or questions? No? Okay, then we can conclude our conversation. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It was very good.